Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forsythe's Existential Home podcast. I'm really delighted today to be joined by Eli Dourado. And Eli is the Chief of Economist at the Abundance Institute. He focuses mostly on the hard tech and innovation needed to drive large increases in economic growth. And you've worked on so many different topics, and you always apply this really progress-oriented, optimistic lens to a variety of different issues that are very dear to Forsythe's heart. You write about them. I think you do some investing too. You really try to encourage a policy change around them. You educate people big time on many of the areas that are really important. And you're just like an all around, I think, really like optimistic, yet pragmatic, progress driven individual. I've personally met you a few years ago now at our Vision Weekend through an introduction by Jason Crawford, who highly nominated you and recommended that we invite you. And since then, I've been just trying to keep up with all the various different Substacks that you put out, and the works in progress articles and so forth. So it's been like just a wild ride trying to follow you and you're riding around because you have a really wide, just like breadth of topic that you put your progress lens on. So I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, maybe if you want to kick us off by literally just introducing yourself, anything that I missed in my intro, and maybe giving our listeners a little bit of a perspective on what got you started on the path that you're on right now. It's a very unusual one. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear more.
Thank you, Allison. You're too kind. So let's see what got me started on my path. So I was actually trained as an economist. I was very interested in like political economy and that whole broad topic. And then as I was kind of doing my PhD and on a track to get into academia, I realized that actually is not the life for me. And so I veered off into like the tech policy world. I spent a few years at the Mercatus Center where I developed a really real appreciation for like hard technology and ended up leaving to go actually do some hard technology. I spent a few years as the first policy hire at a company called Boom, which is building supersonic airliners, and really a lot of like pragmatic interactions with policymakers in that space. And then when I left Boom, I went back to nonprofits. I went to spend some time at the Center for Growth and Opportunity and now at the Abundance Institute, where I just take the sort of economic lens of what actually would drive economic growth and like how, let's say we were actually trying, Allison, to increase economic growth like by a lot, right? Like how would we do it? And we would try to increase productivity and we would try to take these technologies that increase productivity and we would deploy them widely and we would saturate the economy with maximum productivity generating technologies. And so that's the lens that I look at things through. And I think about how can we, suppose we were actually trying, like, how would we actually increase economic growth? And the guiding principle that sort of steers my work.
Awesome. And could you share a little bit more about the Abundance Institute and especially like maybe the levers through which you're trying to implement that change? Is it you do a lot of writing? What other levers do you have in your toolbox?
Yeah, sure. The Abundance Institute is a pretty new nonprofit. We are really focused on making the future look like the future. And a lot right now is focused on AI and energy. And I think we're going to, over the next year, maybe get into some biotech as well. But really thinking about both the policy changes that need to happen as well as the cultural shifts that need to happen. So how can we get people to not be afraid of change, which is, I think, the very common basic human response to powerful new technologies. And so we're thinking pretty broadly about like how can we get it done in terms of both the sort of the broad-based cultural change that you need and the sort of more on the ground policy changes that are needed to support it as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into some of the technologies that you just mentioned in a sec, but you've been kind of at various institutions, organizations over this your like pretty rich career path at this point. And in this kind of field of broadly progress studies or however you would define it, how did you see the kind of cultural shift of like how people even thought about the future from, let's say, when you started getting interested in this to now? I definitely see that there's finally a wave again in terms of people actually like coming out of the closet and being excited about progress again.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did you perceive that kind of like cultural moment or that cultural shift over the years that you've been involved?
Yeah, I would say the shift in my thinking happened around 2014. That was a year where I took over the program that I was working at. So I got to be the boss for the first time. And also read Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, which was influential in my thinking, and made the decision to shift my own work based on some of that thinking. I guess the current moment in sort of progress studies thinking, it's hard to avoid tracing it back to the Collison and Cowan article in The Atlantic, which was saying that there should be a new progress of science. That, I think, catalyzed like a lot of people to start thinking in these terms. I think that the sort of movement has evolved from that article. I mean, I think that article was really thinking about this should be like a university department or something like that. I don't know if that's what they had in mind, but that's what I took away from it when they first wrote it. And I think now it's combined with a bunch of other movements. The sort of, I think about Ezra Klein's like supply side liberalism movement, right? That has merged. And Derek Thompson wrote about this idea called the abundance agenda. And I think that there's just been a general recognition, across a lot of different groups that a lot of our problems are because we can't build anymore. We can't deploy things in the physical world. We're not moving fast enough. And if we could figure out what the granular obstacles are and then address those, we could cumulatively get a much faster rate of progress. And so I think it's a viewpoint that's like on continuing to onboard more people as people write about it on the internet and so on. And it's just organic so far. And which I think is still good. I don't want it to be too institutionalized yet. I like the sort of grassroots nature of it.
Yeah, it's continuously evolving. Like I think when there's now also the Progress Conference, which also has this like abundance theme around it. And I just remember when I've heard abundance popping up again, it reminded me of Eric Drexler's book, Abundance, more of a nanotechnology framework. But I was like, okay,
Yes.
we're back again. I like it.
Yes.
But I think like more broadly speaking, in general, there's been like, I guess from there was like a big EA moment. There was a big EEC moment in the cultural zeitgeist. Then now you have various kind of like evolution of like other accelerationists, like sub movements that are a little bit more specified. So like human ec or longevity ec, don't die ec, BCI ec. So like various different people, I think, that are interested in a specific field and trying to accelerate that have their own ec now. And so do
Yeah.
you. Can you explain what you're going to handle is?
I sometimes say I'm TFP-ACT, which is cheating, right? The TFP is total factor productivity, which is this economic concept of how much output are you getting for your input. So how much for you have some amount of labor and capital, like how much GDP can you produce with that, holding your inputs fixed. And I think that's like the right framing is as I think about the economy, like that's what we want, right? We could have higher GDP if we all work twice as many hours. And that's not necessarily a good world. Or if we saved more and consumed less and had more capital applied. We know we want to consume also. So it's getting away from those value judgments of like how hard and long should we work and so on. And just looking at, okay, just narrowly, if we think about the economy as this function that turns labor and capital into output, how well is that function operating? And so I really like that that concept, and it's what I think of as the most important thing. And then I think it's also very grounding because people will get very excited about some new technology, and I'll be like, what will this actually do to TFP? And if the answer is like TFP isn't really moving up yet, then it lets us know our work is not done. There's more to go. This is not going to be the sort of savior yet.
So what was most influential at moving it up, and what could be most influential in doing so in the future?
It's a good question. I think so. There's a period of TFP growth from about 1920 to 1973, where that was the fastest it ever grew in the US. And you have, in that period, you have a lot of economic change. You have the Great Depression, interestingly. Actually, that was a time when there was consolidation, figuring out how to make things work under severe economic hardship. You had World War II, which I think of as a time when that was maybe the only time in American history where like people were really not complacent at all. Like we pulled out all the stops to try to make stuff happen. And we had incredible innovation in that period. Just such rapid change. And then and then in the 50s and 60s, I think there was like this very palpable sense of optimism. And this is when the Jetsons came out, right? Like the TV show, right? Like, it was like the culture was like, things are going really fast. And then starting in the 60s and into the 70s, I think you started seeing some skepticism of that, right? Some people argued, okay, we're not actually, in some sense, the economic growth of the past is fake, right? So you had Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, like saying, oh, we're not accounting for the environmental values, or Ralph Nader, right, saying we're not safe enough. And so there's, you need to reprioritize to these other things. And if you look at, okay, and TFP since 1973 has grown a lot more slowly, or we've done a lot better on environment and safety, but it's gotten to be somewhat stifling, I think, that we've gone so far. And those are like good values to have. I'm not against clean environment and high value of human life, but I think that's that, plus the idea that like we can't inconvenience people. So you have a lot of NIMBYism and a lot of community input and so on. And those processes, I think, also slow things down. So if you think about the hindrances into the economy today, I think it's that we can't. It's hard to inconvenience people. It's hard to do things that like might be unsafe, and it's also hard to do things that destroy jobs. So you can think about, this is the land of the free. You can do anything you want, except you can't inconvenience people. You can't do anything unsafe, and you can't destroy any jobs. That kind of explains like why it's so hard to make as rapid progress today. Because I guarantee you, like during World War II, we didn't care about that stuff, and we made a lot more rapid progress. So
I guess you
I
also
think those are
like
the main factors.
institutional mission creep. Then it's much easier to just add more safety and regulatory and policies and safety restrictions to institutions than actually take some of that stuff out again. I think
Hmm.
reforming NIH, FDA, like all of that stuff is
Sure.
you just accumulate over time as these institutions.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of red tape, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We see in a few instances, we've seen agencies admit that they've gone too far on safety. So I'm following this rulemaking that's happening at the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, where they've actually said one problem is we're too stringent on the safety requirements for small airplanes, like the 4-passenger airplanes that people use for personal use. Like we've made it so hard to get certified in one of those vehicles that people are substituting something else, which is experimental airplanes. And experimental airplanes are less safe than regulated but not type certified airplanes. So so they've actually realized that if they weaken the safety standards, they'll actually make things more safe and promote a lot of innovation. And so I think that getting more agencies to see things that way can really drive a lot of progress.
I wonder how, and that's totally like a kind of like segue, but I wonder how that applies to AI and AI safety, because there's like definitely like a movement within AI safety of, okay, we need a like organization like the FDA for AI safety, or or AI should be more regulated, such as the FAA does. And I wonder with these bits in place of, okay, there's sometimes mission creep, sometimes like actually you have basically collateral effects that you can't always predict institutions, organizations existing, but I guess we'll find out eventually.
Yes. It won't be long before we learn something.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and so you've talked a little bit about the past, what brought it up, and like looking at in the future, what do you think could increase TFP? Like if you're pinpointing a few things, like what would you be excited about?
I think the sort of my number one thing right now is the speed of permitting, like how long it takes a federal agency to be allowed to even make a decision on something. So right now there's this law that's been in place since 1970 called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and that mandates a lot of environmental reviews before there's a lot of agency decisions. Now, it doesn't actually mandate any environmental standards, so it doesn't actually protect substantively the environment in any way. It's just this long process you have to go through to be allowed to move forward on your project. And so when I look at like, why can't we do things quickly today in terms of building a high-speed rail line, or even implementing congestion pricing in New York City, or a lot of different projects, rolling out a new geothermal power plant. all of this stuff is held up by procedural rules that we put in place because we didn't trust federal bureaucrats to take enough consideration of the environment, right? And so these procedural rules, I think they just slow a lot of things down, and it's just pervasive. It's throughout the whole economy. It applies to every federal agency, and then a lot of state governments have like state level NEPAs as well. So it applies to state agencies too. So if you could speed up permitting, I think that's something that would allow us to deploy quicker, to get more iteration. And those are the things that actually drives economic growth. It's deployment and iteration. It's actually not, it's not just R&D. Like obviously you need R&D at some point, but I think that there's a lot of over focus on just the science, right? And we need the science, we need the scientific breakthroughs, but then we need them to once if you have a new paper, great, but that doesn't affect economic growth at all until it's deployed at scale and until it's perfected in the real world. And getting that faster, I think, is the key to real like abundance and prosperity.
Yeah, we had Stuart Buck on the podcast as well from the Good Science Institute, and he had some really just amazing ideas to reform like a variety of the different institutions.
Yeah.
Like, how would you actually go about that? Because it does seem like it's this collective action problem where it's really difficult within one organization to say, okay, you should be doing things differently because there's always this one department that would be blamed ultimately if something got wrong, if something went wrong based on the time that they didn't spend on it, or the kind of like policy that they now repealed, or yeah, the requirement that they now let go of. So how would you actually in practice do this?
Um, for permitting speed in general, like we actually need policy change. I think if you want to move faster in permitting, it's hard to do that without literally just making some of the requirements go away, or at least in certain contexts go away. More generally, though, I think that it's very hard to change organizational cultures, right? In the corporate world, we even to some extent we give up on it and we say, okay, obviously, like some new startup that's hungrier and more dynamic is going to have to come in here and change this industry, right? So you see something like, okay, is it easier to reform Boeing or to create a new SpaceX? And it turns out it's probably easier to create a new SpaceX than to reform Boeing. Now, with a lot of like government agencies, we don't have a choice, right? You can't have a new startup government come in and take over the government market. So I think it's just always going to be a little bit dissatisfactory, but we just have to try our best within the confines of we can't overthrow the government to do our best to get agencies to operate more efficiently and to get Congress to care about that sort of like efficient governance.
I guess you have somewhat of a little bit of competition, at least, and to the extent that there's regulatory arbitrage. um,
Yes. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of regulatory arbitrage. There are a lot of places where it doesn't work at all, right? As I mentioned, I work on supersonics for a while, and I was thinking about, okay, could there be regulatory arbitrage in the supersonic industry? No, there can't, because there's only one globe, and you're not gonna like fly supersonic like within Prospera or something like that, within a charter city or Singapore. You can just fly supersonic in Singapore. No, it doesn't work. You have to have the biggest markets for travel need to approve you. Um, and the same is true like in drugs, for example. Like I think the US is actually 58% of the pharmaceutical revenue of the world. And so really drug companies they only care about the US market, and lots of European countries have price controls and so on that just make them not very profitable. And so all the decisions are made in terms of what will let us get to the US market. And so the regulatory arbitrage is it there for the most part. I think there's medical tourism and a few other good innovations that still do help. But and then there's other things that are more digital, I think, where there could be a lot of regulatory arbitrage.
I guess I just
Yeah.
know in the longevity sector, at least, there's at least a few companies, projects that have gone to Prospera now, and now
Yeah.
they're staying there, don't get shut down. I hope they don't. But
Yeah.
and then Singapore, it's so funny that you brought that up because there are like a lot of longevity biotech companies who are just like,
Yeah.
okay, we've had it, we're off to Singapore, and
Yeah.
and they've never been seen again.
Yeah, I think medical tourism, I think, is something that could really work. I was down in Prospera, and I had some medical tourism ideas while I was there. I was like tempted to try to get something started over there, but we'll see.
Okay, interesting. You briefly brought up the digital part as well. So with the digital part, are you referring more to the kind of like network state or like coalescing on issues that you care about with like-minded folks online and using that to increase your bargaining power as a group, whether or not you like live in the same jurisdiction? Is that what you're referring?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, the remote work, right? Even I don't know to what extent this is happening, but like crypto to some extent, obviously get around a lot of state-based jurisdictional impositions. Yeah, that kind of stuff I think works. You can definitely, we're not as limited by just a single jurisdiction on those things.
Okay, maybe getting one more kind of like societal or like governance topic out of the way. You also wrote on different voting systems, and we could use those possibly to create change within the US without having
Yes,
to kind of look elsewhere. And what was that about? Could you bring people up to speed?
I think the danger that we have in our current political system is polarization, people hating each other, like sort of people arguing over performative issues, like who's allowed to use what bathroom instead of like really important substantive issues. And maybe a lot more harmful things, misinformation and so on. So I was thinking about this in terms of how do you empower the middle of the spectrum of political opinion, right? Because I think right now the sort of the primary system, what it does is it empowers sort of the fringes on both sides. And so you have this for a while, like one side will be ascendant and you'll have extreme policy on one side. It doesn't actually change that much, but you have like extreme movements in one side. And then 4 years later, it's the other side. And you have this ping ponging back and forth between certain views. And we political scientists and political economists they understand like how this works to some extent. And that is you could do ranked choice voting or have some kind of maybe even a Condorcet method, which is my favorite, to produce a candidate that's guaranteed to be near like the median voters' preferences every time. And if you had that, you would see more moderation in the elected officials. You would see people catering to the middle of the distribution more. So they do whatever they take to win their party primary, but then they try to cater to the middle of the distribution to actually get elected and try to govern as a moderate and so on. And I think that would just overall be healthier for our current government than what's happening now, which is people are still trying to appeal to their party bases more than to like a normal person.
Yeah, I know that like Andrew Yang also like popularized at least like ranked choice voting
Yeah.
in the public consciousness. But I always thought that it's almost like a chicken and egg problem. You need ranked choice voting to make ranked choice voting happen. Something like that. Or what
Maybe
do you think is the incentive of the current government to push for that so that it's better in the next election cycle?
So there are a couple of states that have implemented ranked choice voting. Maine and Alaska, New York City has it for mayoral elections and so on. And in those systems, yeah, it works reasonably well. Like the moderates tend to win. The activists hate it, and the more extreme activists, they're like, "What? This seems unfair. Like we won the sort of the first ballot, but then we lost the election. This is not fair." So it absolutely empirically seems to work in the places it's been tried. There's better and worse forms of it. So a lot of times what people are actually doing is like instant runoff voting, which is the easiest one to understand, but maybe not the very best method. But I think it would be I think it'd be great to have it spread more widely. I think that's something that could create a lot more of a like say make politics boring again, right? If we just elected a bunch of moderates, it would just be less dramatic, less sensational, less outrageous. And I think it's a good path forward.
Making politics boring again, that is definitely not the path that we're currently on right now.
No.
But even just roping it down a little bit or roping it back a bit would probably make a lot of difference. It would definitely give people some time back to work or do other things than talk
Yes.
about it.
Yes.
But okay, so now we got a lot of the kind of more societal and perhaps like more regulatory or more social issues out of the way. Now let's talk about the future. So
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think is so refreshing about you is that yes, you are pretty pragmatic, but you're also like deeply optimistic about the future. And I really like excited to bring that back. And so I'm just curious, were you always this way? Did you read something that made you, or yeah, is it more like a kind of an inherent attitude towards life, or is it more based on a specific thing that you came across?
I think I've always been forward looking in every way that counts. I think, and so I think cognitively, like I'm an economist, not just by training, but actually by like disposition and preconceptions and so on. So I think as when I actually discovered economics, like in college, like it all just like automatically made sense to me. That's how I think. And part of that is that the past is a sunk cost, right? So you can't change the past. Like you shouldn't make decisions on the basis of sunk costs, right? You have to look at where you are now and where you want to be, and that informs your decisions. But you don't want to, for example, invest in something because you've invested in the past and that you don't want to see yourself lose money. You don't want to throw good money after bad. That's like the common thing. And so just by disposition, I've always been forward looking and always just interested in what the future might look like. I I have this memory of being like 7 or 8 years old and looking at like GDP statistics in the World Almanac and like projecting out forward. Okay, based on past rates of growth, this is what it'll be like when I'm an adult. And I think we've undershot that trend. But yeah, and just I think yeah, I don't know. I think I come by it honestly. It's just part of my disposition.
Okay, wonderful. I think actually many economists that I know are of a similar disposition, really quite forward looking, and they I guess they have more of an appetite or ability to hold like really large kind of like time spans and changes over time in their head. And if they then have an interest in the future, like they at least are willing to consider quite ambitious world. So
Hmm.
that's nice. Okay, could you share perhaps like a little bit more specifically if you could wave a magic wand, even though economists hate that saying because there is no magic wand and it's all humans cooperating with each other. What would a positive future for you look like? If we get the world that you think, if the future was looked like the future again, what would it look like to you?
I tend to divide things into four key sectors of the economy. So I think about health, housing, energy, and transportation, right? Health is like right now it's 17 or close to 18% of GDP. It's a huge burden on a huge expenditure that we're burdened with. And I think about, okay, like how can you a drive that cost down so that we're spending less and getting better health outcomes at the same time. And so I've been thinking a lot about what is scalable and what is not scalable in health. And I think what is scalable is manufacturing stuff, and what's not scalable is like services that are provided by another human being. What that means is like what we really need is like drugs and devices, and we need fewer medical procedures, fewer hospital stays, and so on. So thinking about like how can we accelerate drug and device development so that we have fewer hospital stays, so that we have fewer surgeries and so on. And so that you can see that they substitute for each other pretty easily if you think about something like statins, which lower atherosclerosis. We've actually seen in the data, there's been like, yeah, I forget the number, 60,000 fewer like hospital stays because of we've deployed statins widely. And then the trope of science fiction, like the end point of all this is like the auto doc from The Expanse. You put this cuff on your arm and it like monitors all your vitals and tells you exactly what's wrong with you. And then if you need drugs, it can synthesize the drug and inject it exactly the right amount into your body or whatever. And so if you had something like that, we would spend like almost 0% of GDP on healthcare and we'd have much better outcomes. And that's the world I'm thinking about for medical. And then,
One
yeah,
second. When you say the service part is not so easily automatable, but technically we saw that when people switched to like Zoom calls to and talk with their doctors, that was already like a big productivity increase, but also if you had things like AI healthcare agents or something, of
Yeah.
which there are a few around now that
Yes.
are being trialed, it feels like services would be automatable if we would let them to be, if we allow them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's another avenue we could go down. I think what's interesting is you've seen in the UK, they have these long lines to see a primary care physician if you're in the UK. Just they have shortages of doctors. And so a lot of people are just, what they're doing is they're doing telemedicine with Singapore. And it's $12 or something like that for
And they're
a
actually flying
visit.
to Romania, I think.
And they're
And
flying to Romania.
yes.
Okay. But just like even telemedicine with the doctor, if you can't see a British doctor at all, and you can get a Singaporean doctor on the phone or on a video call in 5 minutes for $12, like that's a good option. Now, it's actually funny because in the US, we loosened telemedicine rules during the pandemic, right? Like we said, okay, you can go across state lines now for telemedicine, right? And then after the pandemic was open, we undid that. So now we're back to the world where we don't have as competitive a market in telemedicine. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see like how quickly we can get to a world where AI chatbots or whatever's after chatbots are able to actually like substitute for doctors on some margin. Obviously, like they already can. I
You
prompt
probably already do to me.
yeah. Yeah, no, I've asked a lot of medical questions to ChatGPT. And yes, so to what extent does that capability improve? And to what extent is it like officially allowed, which may or may not matter in the end, but probably matters to some extent. So yeah, so definitely a way to scale things a lot better than having another flesh and blood human have to like spend like their full attention on you. That doesn't scale well.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
But that was only one of 4 topics.
That was one. That was one. That was health. Housing, I think, relatively conventional. Like YIMBY, like we should build more. We don't have to. Not everywhere has to be high rises. Not everywhere even has to be multifamily. I would look at like the specific parts of various cities that are where we found that there is a zoning tax, right? And we should liberalize zoning in those areas. And we can have. I think that one of the a thing that I think people don't recognize is that we can have both more affordability and more neighborhood character at the same time. There's no reason. Um, People obviously very often oppose density because there's like a neighborhood character consideration, but we should be able to have more of both. And so I'm really interested in how can we create places that are just dense but lovely, and how we can have a lot more of those, and then cater to the broad range of preferences that people have in housing. Okay, not everybody has to live in like dense urban walkable neighborhood if they don't want to, but we're going to have at least some of that for the people who do want that. And so I think that's trod territory. Energy and transportation. So energy, I think we just need a lot more deployment. We have a lot of tools, but we make it hard to build new capacity. If you're building a big solar farm, you're going to have to go through lots of environmental review. You're going to need permission from the grid to connect. Like some of these interconnection queues take years to get through. The environmental review takes years to get through. You get opposition to your plan because I don't know, like some local group will just oppose it, or the big environmental groups will oppose it. Something like 1/7 of all the NEPA lawsuits are from the Sierra clubs. So there's a lot of that. And I think there's new energy technologies.
Recently in Germany, you had protesters storm the Tesla factory.
Yeah.
When I saw it on Twitter, I was like, that's the most high bang for the buck that you want to get out of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I think there's new energy technologies that we need to take advantage of. Obviously, nuclear is not a new technology, but we can do a lot more with it. There's a lot of different modalities of nuclear. There's the sort of big plans. So if you think about the big gigawatt, multi-hundred megawatt plants, like maybe like I think one idea that appeals to me is we should just design one of them and stamp out like 100 different copies of it instead of, because right now every one of these plants is like uniquely designed in bespoke fashion. It's like a cathedral to nuclear energy or something like that. And no, we just need to be more pragmatic and just stamp out 100 copies of the same plant. A lot sort of interest in small modular and micro reactors. Obviously, I think that's promising if we can get over some initial hump and increase the amount of iteration that's going on there.
So would you push for nuclear over, let's say, solar and trying to get some of the big
No,
solar away, or is
no,
there a
I would
preference at all?
push for both. All I think I'm actually a big fan of geothermal energy. I think is like such a huge resource, bigger than bigger than fission as a resource. Actually, like there's more crustal thermal energy than there is like energy in all the uranium that we could potentially get to. Solar, the drop in panel prices has been very impressive. If it continues a few years, like the panels are, you could almost think of the panels as basically free. And then the costs are really just like these like deployment, installation type interconnection costs. That's where all the cost is going. And that's really great. Batteries, I've become like really excited about batteries, but particularly like future chemistries. So you mentioned that I do some investing. I invested in this company called Oros that is building a new cathode. So instead of nickel, manganese, cobalt cathodes or lithium ferrophosphate cathodes, like they have a new cathode that's denser and cheaper. And that's really the bottleneck right now as I see it in batteries. But if we get nature wants us to have like really dense and cheap batteries, and I think that those are going to happen and will be super exciting. So you have falling solar and battery prices. Batteries are also good for nuclear and geothermal actually, because they allow you to ramp up and power up and down a lot more easily than spinning up and slowing down your turbines.
It's almost come up at every one of our molecular machines, molecular nanotech, and broadly
Yeah,
related workshops as an application space that would be really good to have. But I'm really glad
yeah,
to see that there's progress happening now on that front.
yeah. And really good batteries mean not just like electric cars, but flying electric cars and flying electric cars with laser weapons on the front and, all the other
Will we finally get our
good stuff
flying
we want.
cars eventually, if it goes well?
I mean, I think, lots of people working on flying electric vehicles, and it seems like some of them might get certified as early as next year. And they'll probably have like relatively short range, but could be useful in a lot of applications. So it's really exciting. And
I've
then,
just
of course, the
seen
other,
sorry, I've just seen the electric boat, the foil boat that's on foils.
yeah,
That's zooming around here, San Francisco, and
yeah, very cool.
very aesthetically pleasing to watch, if anything.
Yes, yes, yes. Very cool stuff. And then the other thing in transportation that I'm like super excited for is the return of supersonic flight. We
Could
had
you share more
Concorde.
about that? What's your pitch here?
Yeah. Okay. We had Concorde from 1976 to 2003 in service. So fly at Mach 2. So the 2 point something times faster than our planes today. And then it just went away. So you could fly between New York and London in 3.5 hours. And then so the story on why it failed or why it didn't fail, but why it went out of service is they only had 14 planes in service. It was a relatively small market. The most expensive to operate, kind of extremely expensive to maintain a fleet of 13 vehicles which is what it was after one of them crashed. You really need to be able to get the cost down so that you can have a bigger fleet, so that you can spread the maintenance costs over more vehicles, the cost of the maintenance program. And you need to have that bigger fleet. We've had a lot of advancements in engine efficiency and in materials for the airplane, and as well as like computational fluid dynamics. So an amazing fact about Concorde is it was designed with like pencils on slide rule paper, right? Like they did not have computer aided design for it at all. So just incredible that they could do that. But we can do a lot better today. And then the other thing that would really increase the market size is allowing us to fly over land. So right now that is basically banned everywhere in the world. So Concorde only flew supersonic over the Atlantic Ocean.
For noise pollution reasons, or
for sonic boom, yeah, the sonic boom. It's actually not that annoying, but it at low altitude it's annoying. But they never were gonna do sonic boom at low altitude. But so partially for sonic boom reasons, partially for protectionist reasons, because Concorde was a European plane, and the U.S. didn't want the Europeans to overtake Boeing, and so they didn't allow it over the U.S. And then, of course, the Europeans didn't allow it over Europe either. So it's fair play. But yeah, I think we know a lot more today. We've done a lot of experiments on how to soften the boom. And so I think if you had a relaxation of the overland ban today, I think you would see very quickly, you would see people designing like smaller planes, business jets, designed to have a softer boom and to fly over land. And then that would get the flywheel rolling. That would get the industry like investing in the supersonic specific technologies. And I think it is totally possible to have Mach 3-ish, maybe even Mach 4 travel, like at the price of today's economy, um, with further advancements in the field.
It would also seem like now the market is just so much bigger naturally, just because more
Yeah.
people are flying and more people are trying to get to places ASAP, but they don't have the money to spend on a private plane.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's very true. If you look at looking at just the market that Concord served. So when I did this analysis a few years ago, but if you look at when Concord went out of service in 2003, since that time, the premium transatlantic passengers have doubled, right? So like already it's like double the number of people like paying at least for business class on transatlantic flights. And so Concorde would absolutely, this is a plane designed in the 1960s, and it would be absolutely be profitable if it was still operating today. And so that tells you the value of speed. And like we would definitely be able to design something better today, and then also make it a profitable program.
Love it. I think there you definitely picked like a niche area that,
Yeah.
that I haven't heard very much discussed yet. So thanks for focusing on that. And was there a fourth one, or did we get through
We
all
did
four of them?
energy and transportation. So those were the four that I said. So
Okay,
health, housing, energy, transportation.
transportation, housing. I forgot the
Yeah.
housing part. Just because it's more talked about. It's a little bit more kosher
Yeah.
here, so I'm just going to
Yeah.
talk about it. Okay, wonderful. And so we've talked a little bit about what you think is holding those like general societal progress back. Is there anything specific that you think is holding these technologies back? Or if we're on a good path in 5 years, like what are indicators that we're on a good path versus okay, if we mess things up and are stagnating more on these technologies, are there any like more universal factors that are holding all of these bits back that we didn't discuss yet? Or what's blocking that world right now?
I think that the biggest blocker is complacency. I think people get very bound up in their own lives or in their narrow problems, and they don't think, yeah, the way that you do at Forsythe, right? Like they don't think in the bigger picture and how can we drive progress and how can we move technology and humanity forward. And I think that's the biggest. I'm optimistic in the sense that I think we can realize this future. The sort of more pessimistic part is we're not on track to do that. I feel that something needs to change for us to be able to realize it. And I think that thing is we as a society need to be less complacent, more unified, more rowing in the same direction, and just more focused on clearing away the dead wood and renewing our institutions to be able to make that happen.
Do you think that because those were all topics that are like, they're not pedestrian, but they're more like themes and areas that are like, I guess, well known to the general public. And then there's others that you said that you might want to focus on a little bit more in the future, such as biotechnology, such as AI. And I know that you published like a really interesting Alzheimer's and longevity study with John Peng, and then obviously it's nanotechnology spring. And you had some really interesting kind of controversial takes, heretical takes on AI. So yeah, within these newer domains, do you think it's easier to just get people excited about these new domains, even though they're obviously also not new, rather than making them shift their thinking about the domains that we already know? Is that the reason why you focus also on these newer paths? Or yeah, what's the thinking around that? And is there anything that we can learn from these new domains to push for progress?
I think that something that's scarce is just people's imagination. And so if you can explain to people what is possible with this new technology, right? With sort of longevity technology, what is the realm of we could actually cure a bunch of age-related diseases or prevent a bunch of age-related diseases and extend health span and extend lifespan. And I think most people they're not naturally thinking about that. You have to raise that to their consciousness. And so I think being on the cutting edge and then being able to explain to people what are the implications if we get this right. I think that has to be part of the vision and what drives them forward.
Yeah, I love how in nanotechnology spring you laid out this, because the problem with nanotechnology when we try to communicate about it, it's often it's just not a platform technology, but this multiplying factor that could affect most things that we care about in the world. It could affect energy, it could affect
Yeah.
some of medicine, it could affect better production of materials for space travel, what have you. Like it may even carbon sequestration. The application space is so vast that it's not like one specific thing point to of that's why we need it. And there's always like another way to do that one application cheaper, faster, sooner. And so it's very
Hmm.
difficult to convey this world, apart from if you write Diamond Age or something.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's harder to convey that world. So I salute you for having done that so well. But really, article was shared a lot in our community, and I think it really like just reinvigorated people's interest in that field. And it's hard to communicate about that, and you did it like exceptionally.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really fun piece to write. And yeah, I'm delighted to continue working to try to find a way to get the ball rolling on a little faster on some of that. I don't know. I don't know if you have views on this, but I think a lot about what could be the first application, right? What is the first thing that we should build? And even if it's not like the sort of the self-replicating version at first, right? What is the first molecularly assembled? And
Yeah.
I don't have an answer yet, but I think about it a lot.
Yeah, it's actually we have another workshop this year. This time with Eric Drexler, who's working on this molecular systems engineering platform now, and then at the same time another effort around Jeremy Barton. They're trying to recreate a roadmap that is now about functional
Yeah.
nanomachine systems, and possibly an institute around that. And that is definitely the question that like we will be asking ourselves this workshop, which is like, what is the MVP that could like
Yeah.
just get the idea across, but also is something that could put in place like a flywheel after which like more applications could be coming. And even if that is still somewhat away and possibly expensive and requires lots of interdisciplinary progress, what is that one killer app?
Yeah.
But yeah, I will let you know if and when we have a good answer to this question, because it seems really difficult. All right. I think we've covered a lot of ground based on, I think, your exceptional skill to convey these really difficult like concepts in an easily digestible way that gets people excited. How did you get to this kind of like writing talent? And is there anything that for someone new, entering that kind of like progress universe or whatever you want to call it, is there something that they should read, listen to, or do to get up to speed?
On how to write.
Yeah, just generally like getting the progress universe to think the way that you
Yeah.
think, basically.
Oh, so what should they? I would say the way that I think is very broad, right? And so I think I try to know a lot about a lot of different things. I think a lot of people probably don't read broadly enough, and I think a lot of people have a lot of technical expertise in a narrow domain, but then they don't know anything about geopolitics or they don't know anything about taxation or whatever. I think everything is related to everything else, and people should, in general, a lot of people at least should read more broadly. And then I think the other thing is I just encourage a lot more people to write more often and more frequently and share their ideas earlier. So I think I've been basically writing on the internet now for 20 something years. And it's definitely a skill that you hone with practice. And there's no real shortcut. I wouldn't say I'm naturally a talented writer. It's just a lot of practice and have gotten better at it through that.
Are there any blogs or outlets or subsects that you really love and that changed your way of thinking?
Uh, my friend Maxwell Tabarrok has one called Maximum Progress that I read all his posts, and
It's
they're always good
wild.
and thoughtful. So he does a good job. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't single out too many, but there's so much good stuff online. Works in progress is always interesting. Every issue. There's such a wealth of good content. And I should do a shout out to the sort of Roots of Progress blogging program. Like they're trying to help cultivate a bunch of the next generation of writers, which I think is great. And so if you read like what those people are putting out, it's a lot of good stuff. So there's definitely a lot of material these days. I think really the hard part is just there's so much that it's hard to keep up with everything.
Yeah, there are a few podcasts that like do an AI voice read you out lots of the writing. So I feel like that's often a way that where you don't have to sit down, but you can actually listen to the blogs. Like I think
Uh-huh.
if Substack and all the other blogs could just enable like a listening feature like across all blogs, that would help me at least a lot. But it's hard to get through all that content. Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, I think it would be maybe it's like I'm sure you've seen the OpenAI like her mode for
Yeah.
voice, right? You could tell the AI to follow all your favorite blogs, and then you go for a walk, you have your headphones in, you just ask Samantha, what's been going on in the blogs lately, and then she tells you, and then you have questions, you ask, and have a conversation about it. Maybe that's a way to get through it all.
And that's how we're getting a little bit closer to the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wish I would have asked, or any action item that you want people to take away from this? Any final bits? Or how can people find you? That would be very useful to know.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Eli Dourado on Twitter, and elidorado.com on the web. I have a blog/newsletter there, and I'm at the Abundance Institute, so abundance.institute, super simple. And yeah, it's been great talking to you, Allison. I really, really appreciate you and your energy and everything that you put into this movement.
It was very fun, and I'm sure we could have covered much more. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot for all the work that you do. And I'm excited to hopefully see you in person soon, maybe in
Yeah,
October for the Progress
yeah,
Conference. Possibly.
sounds
Okay,
good. Yes, I'll be there.
great.
Yep. All
Well,
right.
thanks a lot, Eli. Have a
All
good
right.
day. And
Thank you.
yeah, we'll be sharing more of the links that you just shared with us online when it goes out. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks very much.